want you to imagine a scenario. It is a highly relatable one, actually.
Oh, definitely.
You are sitting there, right, just scrolling on your phone or maybe your computer, and you are reading an article about a topic you deeply, deeply care about.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is about the future of artificial intelligence or, the state of the education system or even personal health and nutrition. And you start reading with this quiet, underlying sense that you already understand what the core issue is really about.
Right, you have that baseline assumption.
Exactly. And as you move through the paragraphs, certain sentences they immediately stand out to you. They feel incredibly clear. I mean, they just feel obvious.
Yeah.
They seem to effortlessly validate and confirm exactly what you have believed for a really long time.
It is a very specific, deeply satisfying physical sensation. Your shoulders drop, your breathing relaxes, you just feel completely validated.
Yes, exactly. But then you hit another sentence further down the page, and this one feels entirely different.
It feels wrong.
Right, it feels strange. Maybe it strikes you as incomplete or, you instantly suspect the author is being misleading somehow. So what do you do in that exact second?
You skip it.
Right. If you are like most of us, you probably just skim right past it. You keep moving until you find the next sentence that actually makes sense to you.
The one that feels right.
Yeah, the one that feels right. And by the time you finish the entire article, your overall impression is crystal clear, which is that the piece just confirmed what you already suspected.
Which is a remarkably common, I mean, almost universal experience. We process the information that aligns with our worldview so smoothly, and we actively, almost unconsciously, glide right over all the cognitive friction.
Right. And to really cement how powerful this invisible mechanism is, let's look at a brilliant example from the research we are unpacking today.
The documentary example, right?
Yes, exactly. Imagine two friends sitting down to watch the exact same documentary. Let's say it is a really dense investigative piece on a complex issue, like urban housing.
Okay.
So the film ends, the credits roll, and they turn to each other to discuss what they just learned. One friend says, "Wow, that documentary clearly showed that the regulatory problem is much, much worse than people think."
Mm-hmm.
But the other friend just shakes their head and says, "What? I think it actually showed the exact opposite. It proved that everyone is exaggerating the issue and the real problem is just corporate greed."
It's wild.
They watched the exact same films. They were exposed to the exact same interviews, the exact same data points, and, the exact same emotional music.
Uh-huh.
And they both feel completely confident in what they saw.
Oh, absolutely confident.
They both believe, with total certainty, that the evidence in the film heavily supports their own interpretation. Yet they walked away with conclusions that move in completely opposite directions.
They are essentially inhabiting two completely different realities, right? But built from the exact same raw materials.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a really fascinating source document that explores the hidden mechanics of human cognition.
It's a great piece of research.
It really is. Specifically, we are going to figure out exactly why we only seem to see what confirms our existing beliefs, and why sheer evidence is almost never enough to actually change a mind.
Which goes against everything we're taught.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the information presented to those two friends was exactly the same, why do people arrive at wildly different realities?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at a foundational assumption we all naturally make about human thinking.
Okay.
It is an intuitive assumption that sits at the base of almost all our communication. And it is very simple. If evidence is available, people will naturally follow it.
So we are all walking around giving ourselves way too much credit.
Pretty much, yeah.
Just assuming we are perfectly logical creatures.
Precisely. Because in this classical rational model of thinking, the process is incredibly straightforward. First, you acquire information. Then that information leads to an objective analysis. And finally, that analysis leads to a logical conclusion. Therefore, the rule dictates that if the underlying evidence changes, well, the conclusion should logically and automatically update to reflect the new data.
I mean, it makes perfect sense on paper.
It does, but it creates a massive psychological trap. Because we hold this assumption so deeply, when we encounter someone who disagrees with us, especially when we feel we have provided them with incredibly clear, undeniable evidence.
Which happens all the time on the internet.
All the time. We immediately assume it is a failure of reasoning. We think to ourselves, well, they just didn't read the study carefully enough, or they missed the crucial historical context.
Oh, they're just stupid.
Right, they simply lack the capacity to understand the information. We assume the actual machinery of their logic is just temporarily broken.
I have to offer an analogy here for how absurd this assumption actually is when you really look at human behavior.
Please do.
It is like we assume the human brain is just a pocket calculator.
Mm-hmm.
You input new numbers, you hit equals, and you get a new sum. If I punch in 2 plus 2, I get 4. If I suddenly input completely different numbers, the calculator doesn't stubbornly hold on to the 4.
No, it doesn't care.
Exactly. It doesn't argue with me. It just gives me the new answer.
Yeah.
But if that were true for human beings, whenever we are presented with strong, undeniable evidence that contradicts our views, our minds would just change immediately.
We would just update our internal sum.
Right. But that's not what happens.
No, not at all. I wouldn't say it's quite as simple as a calculator being broken, though. It's more that if the human brain is a calculator, it is one with a fierce self-preservation instinct.
Ooh, I like that.
It is not just refusing the new numbers, right? It is actively protecting the previous equation, and that leads exactly into the reality check this framework provides.
Because everyday experience tells a completely different story from that calculator model.
Exactly. Not only do people's views fail to change when they are faced with strong, contradictory evidence, frequently, those views actually become substantially stronger.
Wait, really? Stronger?
Yes, stronger. They dig their heels in deeper. The contradictory evidence essentially acts as an accelerant to their original belief.
Which is completely wild when you step back and think about it. The evidence against their belief actually reinforces the belief.
It's totally counterintuitive.
So, because the standard calculator model is fundamentally broken, we have to ask the obvious question: what is the mind actually doing when it encounters new information?
And this brings us to the concept of the mind's internal network. You see, human thinking isn't just about analyzing information in a vacuum. The brain is not a sterile laboratory.
No?
It is an organ deeply concerned with maintaining internal stability. Beliefs do not exist in isolation. They are not independent data points sitting in neat little rows and columns on a spreadsheet.
They're intertwined with everything else.
Exactly. They form a deeply connected web of identity. Our beliefs are intimately tied to our sense of self, our past experiences, our social relationships, and, our fundamental sense of belonging.
Give me an example of how that looks in practice.
Well, think about it. A person's view on the modern education system might be deeply connected to their own painful experiences growing up.
Right.
Or a belief about holistic health or traditional medicine might be tied to generational family traditions, honoring their grandparents. An opinion on economic taxation might be foundational to their professional identity, their community, and how they perceive their own hard work.
So it's basically like playing a massive high-stakes game of Jenga.
Yes. Perfect analogy.
Changing just one belief isn't simply swapping out a single loose wooden block resting on the very top of the pile. It is pulling a load-bearing block out of a highly precarious structure.
Exactly.
It threatens to completely destabilize the entire tower of who you are.
That is exactly the dynamic, and the stakes are incredibly high. When new, contradictory information arrives, the mind does not just evaluate that near data objectively.
You can't afford to.
Right. It quietly and instantly evaluates what changing the existing belief might disturb. Sometimes pulling that Jenga block causes a small, manageable disturbance, but often the disturbance is massive.
Like admitting you're wrong about something huge.
Exactly. Admitting you are wrong about a specific political policy might mean admitting that the community you belong to is also wrong, which might threaten your social standing.
Oh, wow.
So the mind faces an instantaneous calculation. Do I reorganize this massive network of beliefs, basically? Do I collapse the Jenga tower and undergo a full existential crisis? Or do I just reinterpret this new piece of information to make it fit?
And biologically speaking, reinterpretation is almost always the easier, cheaper path.
Always.
Because rebuilding the tower takes a massive amount of cognitive energy. We are literally talking about the brain conserving calories by taking the path of least resistance.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how this reinterpretation actually feels to the individual.
Right, because they don't feel like they're doing anything wrong.
No, not at all. When the mind decides to compress that new information to make it fit the existing narrative, maybe by finding a tiny methodological flaw in the study, or calling it a rare exception, or just dismissing the author as completely unreliable, it doesn't feel dishonest.
It doesn't feel like lying to yourself.
Exactly. The person doing it does not feel like they are lying to themselves or running from the truth. From the inside, it feels exactly like careful, rational evaluation.
They feel like they are just doing rigorous critical thinking.
Yes.
They're actively finding the flaws in the new data to protect the tower and patting themselves on the back for being so sharp, which just makes so much sense.
It really does.
But this natural cognitive tendency, this instinct to protect the Jenga tower, has always existed. Our brains have been playing this game for millennia.
Sure.
So how does this behave in today's world where we aren't just getting 1 or 2 new blocks of information a day, but we are just totally drowning in data?
Well, that is where our modern environment drastically amplifies this ancient mechanism. We expose ourselves to an enormous, unceasing deluge of data.
It's less like reading a single trusted daily newspaper, and much more like standing in a massive hall of mirrors where you get to actively choose which reflection of reality you want to look at.
That's a great way to put it.
We are constantly bombarded with news articles, commentaries, social media feeds, and it's not just basic facts, right? We get highly polished expert opinions, and then literally 3 seconds later, we are served equally polished counter-expert opinion.
The algorithm just feeds it to you.
Instead of facing a limited set of verifiable facts, we are navigating a vast, endless landscape of interpretations.
And within that infinite hall of mirrors, it is almost always possible to find material that supports your exact existing belief. If you believe a certain macroeconomic policy is saving the middle class, you can easily find dozens of well-written articles supporting it. If you believe that exact same policy is destroying the middle class, you can easily find just as many articles proving that view, complete with charts and graphs.
So how does the mind navigate this endless landscape without completely burning out?
It uses what the research calls the smooth versus abrasive guide.
Right, going back to that visceral physical feeling we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Exactly. Information that fits comfortably with what we already believe feels credible. It goes down easy. It feels smooth.
It doesn't shake the Jenga tower.
Right. It literally requires less metabolic overhead for the brain to process. On the other hand, information that challenges our internal network creates cognitive dissonance.
It feels wrong.
It feels suspicious. It creates friction. It feels abrasive, and it forces the brain to expend extra energy to process the contradiction.
And because the brain is inherently designed to conserve energy, we naturally start avoiding the friction.
Over time, that feeling of smoothness actually becomes our primary subconscious guide for what is true. We literally learn to trust what feels consistent, and we learn to distrust what doesn't.
Wow.
And by doing this, step by step, click by click, we quietly build an information environment, a custom-tailored filter bubble that constantly reinforces our existing worldview while shielding us from the abrasive, energy-draining reality of contradiction.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the mind isn't doing all of this filtering out of malice or ignorance or even a desire to be deceptive.
No, not at all.
It is doing this to maintain coherence. The mind desperately needs to answer very basic foundational questions just so we can get out of bed in the morning without having an existential meltdown.
Right.
Questions like, what kind of world do I live in? Who are the good guys? Who is trustworthy? What actions actually make sense for me to take today?
Yes, the mind continuously attempts to maintain a stable internal narrative about the world. Without that narrative scaffolding, human experience just cannot be organized. Every day would feel like waking up on an alien planet.
So this constant filtering, this avoidance of the abrasive and seeking of the smooth, it reveals a hidden structural tug-of-war happening inside our brains every single day.
And that tug-of-war is the core tension we need to understand. It is the permanent, completely irreconcilable tension between two competing forces, stability versus accuracy.
Let's really look at those two forces. Accuracy is the force that demands our beliefs change when the evidence changes.
Right.
It is the drive to adapt to reality, to update our internal map when the actual territory shifts. Stability, on the other hand, is the force that demands our internal narrative remains coherent. It is the drive to function without falling into constant confusion.
Perfectly said.
But I have to ask a question here, and I'm sure you listening might be wondering the exact same thing. Wait, shouldn't accuracy just always win out?
You'd think so.
Isn't stability just a polite academic way of saying someone is being incredibly stubborn and willfully refusing to see the plain facts right in front of their face?
It is incredibly tempting to view it that way, especially when we're arguing with someone. But stability is absolutely biologically and psychologically necessary.
Really? How so?
Think about the psychological toll of the alternative. If every single piece of new contradictory information you encountered forced a complete reorganization of your core beliefs, the sheer act of thinking would be utterly
You'd
paralyzing.
never get anything done.
Daily life would feel terrifying. You would never feel grounded in your relationships or your career. We need stability simply to function in a highly complex, chaotic environment.
We need to assume the floor is going to be solid when we take a step, even if there's a microscopic statistical chance it might cave in. You can't test the floorboards every single time you walk to the kitchen.
Precisely. However, there is a profound societal danger when stability dominates the cognitive process completely.
When it goes too far.
Right. When the gravitational pull of coherence becomes too strong, beliefs become entirely rigid. The mind quietly protects the internal narrative at all costs, even when that coherence completely drifts away from actual objective reality.
Wow.
The mind stops updating the map to match the territory and instead starts pretending the territory looks exactly like the map. It just shapes the incoming information to fit the narrative.
So we are living in a world where coherence often have a much stronger gravitational pull than actual evidence.
Absolutely.
The narrative doesn't bend toward the data.
Yeah.
The data is violently bent to fit the narrative.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So what does this all mean for you? If you were listening to this right now, how is this invisible tug of war affecting your world, your family, your workplace? Let's dive into the actual observable consequences of this mechanism when it operates completely unnoticed in our society.
Well, the first major consequence is polarization. But not just the general concept of people disagreeing, it's the actual mechanics of how they drift apart.
Okay, unpack that.
When different groups of people are exposed to the exact same information, much like those two friends watching the documentary, they don't converge on a shared truth. They gradually move further and further apart.
Even with the exact same data.
Yes. This happens because each individual is selectively emphasizing only the data points that confirm their existing position, while the contradictory evidence is instantly flagged as abrasive and completely discarded.
It's like two people standing back to back, looking at the exact same landscape, but one is only looking through a red filter and the other through a blue filter.
Right.
They're walking completely opposite directions, but both are absolutely convinced they're walking straight toward the objective truth.
And that dynamic leads directly into the second consequence, which is confidence escalation.
This is the really counterintuitive one for me.
Well,
logically, you would think that being exposed to fierce disagreement would make someone pause.
it should, right?
Yeah. If half the room tells you that you are wrong, it should create a little bit of doubt, a little bit of humility. But the reality is, it creates total certainty.
Because the brain interprets that friction as a threat. Remember, each side is deeply embedded in their own perfectly coherent, smooth narrative. When they encounter opposing arguments, they don't view them as valid points to be carefully considered. They view them as undeniable proof that the other side is completely biased, corrupted, or just hopelessly misinformed.
Wow.
The friction of the disagreement doesn't make them question the structural integrity of their own Jenga tower. It makes them fiercely defend it. The result is a massive increase in certainty regarding their original belief.
So they're just thinking, they are disagreeing with my obvious facts, so they must be completely delusional, which proves I am the only sane one here.
Exactly.
It is a completely closed, self-feeding loop.
And that closed loop brings us to the third and perhaps most fascinating consequence, the thinness of evidence.
Oh, this one is so relatable.
It really is. This is a phenomenon you can observe in almost any everyday conversation or argument. People walk around feeling deeply supported by, quote-unquote, the evidence. They feel their views are grounded in solid, unshakable facts.
Imagine being at a Thanksgiving dinner, right? You get into a debate with an uncle about a major policy issue.
Classic scenario.
He is incredibly confident. He cites a headline he saw, maybe references a study he heard about on the news. He is projecting absolute authority.
But if you actually stop and ask him or anyone, including yourself, honestly, to explain the full structure of that evidence without looking at a phone.
Just off the top of their head.
Right. If you asked them to really lay out the data step by step, the methodology, the historical context, their explanation becomes incredibly thin very quickly.
They start to stumble.
They stumble. They repeat the exact same single talking point over and over. It turns out that their deeply held belief doesn't actually rest on a comprehensive evaluation of all the available information. It rests on a highly curated, cherry-picked subset of information.
The smooth information. The stuff that was easy to digest.
Exactly. They remember the feeling of having read an article that proved them right, but they don't actually possess the underlying data. Yet, from inside their own mind, because that belief is so wonderfully coherent with their identity, it feels perfectly heavily supported.
It's like walking around feeling like you have an entire multi-story library of research backing up your worldview.
Right.
But when you actually open the door to the building, it's just a single wrinkled pamphlet sitting on a folding table.
That's a brutal way to put it, but yeah.
But to you, internally, it feels like a massive library. That is incredibly humbling to realize about ourselves.
It is deeply humbling because we are all doing it, every single one of us. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally changes how we view our own certainty and the certainty of those who completely oppose us.
It really does. So as we wrap up today's deep dive, let's look at the core journey we've just taken. We started with the flawed assumption that the mind is just a passive receiver of information. A logical calculator waiting for inputs to objectively sum up the truth.
Which we know isn't true.
Right. We've discovered that it is anything but passive. The mind is an active, protective architect. It organizes, shapes, and filters every single piece of data it encounters to protect the stories it already believes. It is constantly guarding that delicate web of identity.
And reframing disagreement through this lens is deeply important. Recognizing this permanent biological tension between stability and accuracy doesn't magically fix the world.
No, unfortunately.
You can't just flip a switch and turn off the human need for coherence. But it does make the invisible mechanics visible. It finally explains why logic-based arguments rarely change minds.
Yeah.
It explains why two intelligent, well-meaning people can look at the exact same evidence and see entirely different realities. It isn't because they are inherently dishonest or stupid or malicious.
Right.
It is because the human mind is forever balancing two competing vital needs, the need to accurately understand the world and the need to keep the world understandable so we don't fall apart.
The need to keep the Jenga tower standing tall. It is a brilliant, totally empathetic way to look at the human condition.
It really is.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own today. We've established that our minds automatically, instinctively, filter for smoothness and avoid abrasive information just to maintain our internal stability. But what would happen if we started intentionally training ourselves to seek out that intellectual friction? Could deliberately sitting with an abrasive idea, maybe just reading one well-written article from a perspective you entirely disagree with, for just 5 minutes a day, act as a literal workout for your accuracy muscle?
That's a fascinating concept.
Could that tiny daily practice of deliberately destabilizing your own narrative fundamentally change how you interact with the people who disagree with you?
It raises a vital question about how much agency we actually have over the filter bubbles we build for ourselves.
Exactly. Something to really think about the next time you're reading an article and you feel that warm, deeply satisfying, perfectly smooth sensation of being totally, unequivocally right. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.